chills. Number 3. Vice hires a hitman. The deep web has a host of advertisements for all kinds of services, including hitman for hire. These anonymous online figures claim to be willing and able to locate anyone in the world and do them in for the right price with no questions asked. In 2012, one of the reporters from Vice was able to get in touch with an alleged contract killer to get a better feel for the deep web assassination process. Using encrypted emails, the reporter pretends to be the wife of an abusive ex-husband. She claims to want to have him killed so that she can gain full custody over their child. The killer does not make any judgments and simply says that he would be happy to help. He asks for money up front using bitcoins, which is the anonymous deep web currency of choice. Once a proper price is negotiated, the hitman next asks for a photograph of the target and the last known address. They talk about special requirements, which is a code word for either torture or any special circumstances under which the victim is supposed to die. The hitman says he can get results within 2 weeks. Vice decides to end the conversation then and there. Fortunately, the reporter used a picture of a deceased family member along with a fake address, so no one could really be harmed. They never did find out who they were speaking to. This report is just one of the many hitman services the deep web supposedly offers. Unfriendly Solution was another alleged hitman organization that was run by someone who claims to have been a hitman for 7 years. It was shut down in 2014, though it remains unclear if this was by the site's owner or the FBI. Other strange deep web hitman websites include the quote-unquote charity for Donald Trump assassination, which is allegedly accepting anonymous Bitcoin donations to kill the notorious presidential candidate. Perhaps one of the most infamous deep web hitman organizations ever was the Bisa Mafia, which claimed to be able to murder or otherwise severely injure any target on Earth with no delay. When the website was recently hacked, 38 different customers and 3,000 personal messages from a professional-sounding company were leaked to the public. One of the messages from a customer requests that the target gets beat up badly so there will be no bruises and some blood, but don't do anything else. Another simply says, "I want her dead," and goes on to discuss the price. The owner of the Bisa Mafia has released an official statement declaring that the website was fake. Whenever someone contacts them for a hit, the admin says they send all of the information straight to the local police department for review. However, many people believe that this is just a cover-up story, and that the Bisa Mafia was a legitimate murder for hire service. Others still believe that the Bisa Mafia is completely unstoppable and undoubtedly continues to operate to this very day. Either way, if this website was to be believed at all, then the way they recruit new hitmen is by having them commit a crime on video and submit it for the mafia to review and approve of. Here's a video circulating on the internet of an alleged hitman applying to the website by setting fire to a car. The note in the beginning gives the website's address and some other information. Number 2. Cannibalistic desires. Most people want to find someone that they can have children and grow old together with, but Armin Maives had a version of love that was much different. He was obsessed with the idea of eating another man's body. In 2001, the German could not contain himself anymore and took to the deep web to fulfill his darkest desires. He found an online forum morbidly named the Cannibal Cafe that seemed perfect to satisfy his urges. Although the disclaimer at the top of the website made it clear that the Cannibal Cafe was for fantasies involving consenting adults only, Armin was absolutely serious when he posted a short blurb outlining his particular tastes. It read, "Looking for a well-built 18 to 30-year-old to be slaughtered and then consumed." Imagine Armin's surprise when his inbox was instantly flooded with eager responses. He later estimates that as many as 200 different people replied back, all of them happily agreeing to be murdered and eaten. Figuring out who was serious and who was role-playing was a long and arduous process. It took Armin months to interview and sort out potential recruits. As you could expect, most of the replies were from people who wanted to act out an imaginary scenario online, but he narrowed it down to one single person in particular. Burned Brandeis had typed a short but intimate response on the Cannibal Cafe forums that instantly caught Armin's attention. "I am 36 years old," he wrote, 175 centimeters and weight 72 kilograms. He then added, "I hope you are really serious about it because I really want it." The two began messaging each other, and soon they had fallen in love with a passion and hunger that only two people with a fetish for cannibalism could share. Burned lived nearby, and they arranged a date and time that was most convenient for him to be killed and eaten. The two could not be happier about the fatal relationship and regularly bantered back and forth. On the day before their date, Burned wrote, quote unquote, "I'll bring myself for breakfast," at which point Armin replied, "I'll have an appetite, rely on it." Burned arrived at Armin's farmland estate and entered a soundproofed slaughter room. Here, they discussed a mutual interest in computers while smoking cigarettes and drinking coffee. It was as if they were old friends and nothing out of the ordinary was about to happen. Burned suddenly began to have a change of heart and wanted to leave. He was persuaded at the last minute by his cannibal lover to stay. They had physical relations with each other, and then Burned chased 20 sleeping pills with half a bottle of liquor and prepared to die. He passed out a short time later. Armin put Burned in a bathtub. He set up a camera and recorded every last moment as he calmly removed Burned's genitals and fried them to eat. He then read a Star Trek novel as he waited for Burned to die in the bathtub, checking his friend's vital signs every 15 minutes to see if he had finally passed. When hours had passed by, he grew tired of waiting and stabbed his lover in the neck to hurry things up. Then he chopped him into pieces to save for later. Oh, and he buried the head in his garden too. Armin later recounted to authorities in detail how he prepared for his first act of cannibalism. First, he decorated the table with the nicest candles that he could find to set the right kind of mood. Then he bit into a cut of rump steak that had been taken directly from Burned's back. He described the taste of Burned to authorities as pork, yet much stronger. It was a taste he had yearned for over 40 years to taste. He had first thought of eating someone when he was a small child. Psychologists say that Armin and others like him sexualized cannibalism as a way to keep people in his life forever. As a child, Armin was abandoned by his entire family at a young age and grew very bitter as a result. This was around the time that he began to think about eating people for the very first time at just 8 years old. To put it very simply, eating people was Armin's way of making sure that he could never be left by them again. You would think that Armin would have been satisfied for a while after this encounter, but he was not done yet at all. Emboldened by the relative ease of his recent kill, he quickly went back to the deep web to find more people to devour. Unsurprisingly, he eventually creeped out enough people with his confessions that one person alerted the authorities and explained to them that a man was going around openly admitting to murder and cannibalism online. When police traveled to Armin's farmhouse to investigate further, they could find nothing out of the ordinary at first. It seemed like he was going to get away with his crime. When they looked at his freezer, however, they saw that it had a false bottom. Underneath, there was a weird-looking meat inside. At first, Armin said that this was from a wild pig he had killed and slaughtered, but they quickly determined that this was human flesh. Burned had been frozen and was being saved for later. At his trial, Armin said the only thing that he was guilty of was giving Burned a nice death. In fact, since they were both consenting to do this, Armin argued that no murder had taken place at all. This was a mercy killing instead, his lawyers argued. They had Burned on tape giving consent to be killed right up until the very last minute. His victim, if he could be called that, appeared at ease the entire time. A judge reluctantly agreed that this was technically not murder under the current laws, but rather simply a case where two lunatics accidentally discovered each other and followed through with a sick plan. Still, Armin was sentenced to a mere 8.5 years in prison at first. Later, he was put on a retrial and given a life sentence. Although this story happened 15 years ago, there are still plenty of websites centered around cannibalism. Some of them are how-to guides for preparing bodies to eat, and others offer advice for disposing of non-edible parts. Only one can imagine how many people actually put the advice to good use, and how many more Armins there are out there in the deep web looking to meet their Burned. One last thing, in an ironic twist, news outlets have since reported that the cannibal has allegedly gone vegetarian. Number 1. The Australian Monster. In 2011, con artist Peter Scully knew that his days of scamming the Australian public were coming to a close. He had an upcoming trial date to face 117 separate charges for fraud and deception. So instead of accepting his fate with some semblance of dignity, he instead decided to escape all the way to the Philippines and start a life as a professional pedophilic murderer. Once away from the Australian government's reach, Peter considered his options. He was rich by the impoverished country's standards and could buy whatever he wanted, which in Peter's case were small children to commit unspeakable acts with. Peter quickly learned that getting children in a poor country full of starving youth was almost too easy. To achieve his sick goals, he recruited older teenagers who were usually also prostitutes to lure other victims back to his home with the promise of giving them food. He had 2 main girlfriends in particular who regularly supplied him with other neighborhood children to prey upon. Sometimes desperate parents would even knowingly give their children to him, but only with the understanding that he would provide them with food, shelter, and education that they themselves could not afford to provide. Peter could obtain a child in this manner for as little as a 5-pound bag of rice. If the family knew his true intentions, however, they would have never done this. One day, one of Peter's girlfriends came back with 2 young cousins for him. Peter had the cousins wear dog collars and do unspeakable acts as he filmed and assaulted them. His girlfriend covered their faces with a pillow while they screamed. The following day, he told the cousins to dig their own grave and prepare to die. According to Peter's girlfriend, at this point she felt sorry for them and released them from their chains. They escaped, but others were not so lucky. Not only had Peter been abusing children this entire time up to this point, but he was also using the deep web to profit off their misery. He had made a members-only website to share a series of custom videos and distribute them throughout Europe in both North and South America. Anonymous Bitcoin transactions were used to do this. It is also believed that he used live feeds of kidnapped children to take orders from pedophiles from all around the world and do as they instructed. These shows were also recorded and sold. As these horrifying videos made their way around the deep web, authorities were so angered that they formed an international task force specifically designed to identify Peter and take him down. Peter's face was always blurred and his girlfriend wore a mask, but one detective was able to recognize Peter's Australian accent. They now had a country of origin for their suspect. It was their first clue in identifying the man responsible for these videos and taking him down once and for all. Dutch police were able to identify 8 children in the videos as well as the country that it was made from. Authorities knew that they were now looking for an Australian man who had moved to the Philippines. They were also able to identify his girlfriend despite her mask. There were 15 filming locations total, and 5 of the settings were inside houses. Using frame-by-frame footage, the task force was able to identify the 5 separate houses by matching specific areas of the interior, such as the stairs, tiled floors, and windows with those seen in the video. One of the creepiest locations would be a bare attic. The walls form into a triangle shape and there's a picture of the Virgin Mary on one side of the room, and another section that is entirely covered in newspaper comic strips. To imagine that this is one of the many locations where the innocence of countless children was taken is horrifying. One of the properties belonged to Peter, a man with a voice that matched the videos. They now had their man. Eventually, they were able to identify Peter's home address and rushed to arrest him. He seemed to be relatively calm about the entire situation. When he was captured, he only asked for cigarettes and did not say much else. The children in the video were almost all identified and rescued, though at least one remains at large. Sadly, one victim was positively identified as deceased. Her remains were found in a shallow grave under the kitchen floor of a house that Peter had at one point rented. She was made to dig her grave before Peter strangled her. Her death is believed to have been recorded and sold on the deep web. One of Peter's girlfriends brought the authorities to where the girl was. She says that she wasn't around when it happened, but that Peter had told her about it later. In reality, however, she carried out a lot of the abuse herself. She was the one wearing the mask in the video. She and Peter are both awaiting trial. Peter has since tried to entirely pass all of the blame onto his girlfriend, saying that she is the active one in all of this, and that he was merely passively letting her fulfill her wishes. The two are ready to testify against each other at their trial later this year. As if this weren't enough, The arrest of Peter Scully helped bring another Australian pedophile to justice, a 22-year-old man named Matthew Graham. This psychopath is responsible for running the dark web site known as Hurt to the Core, which specializes in appalling content where children are severely injured. He and Peter were close friends online, and Peter sent many of his videos to Matthew in return for access to other people's child abuse videos. Among other charges, Matthew is accused of using his deep web network to give advice to a Russian kidnapper about what to do with a 5-year-old girl, and to host a volume of child abuse videos that were made by another Australian man who owns several daycare centers. Matthew himself was sentenced to 15 years hard time for running his horrendous deep web network. He was a babysitter at the time of his arrest.